This is Robert Martellacci, Chief Digital Publisher of the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's learning and technology magazine. This podcast is brought to you by C21 Canada, Canadians for 21st Century Learning and Innovation. I'm honored to have joined me this morning for a Mindshare Learning Moment. Thomas Murray, Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools, a project of the Alliance of Excellent Education located in Washington, D.C. He has testified before the United States Congress and works alongside that body and the U.S. Senate, the White House, U.S. Department of Education, and State Departments of Education corporations and school districts throughout the country to implement student-centered personalized learning while helping to lead Future Ready and Digital Learning Day. Murray serves as a regular conference keynote, was named one of the 20 to watch by NSBA, the Education Policy Person of the Year by the Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2015, and the Education Thought Leader of the Year in 2017. Connect with Thomas Murray on Twitter at Thomas C. Murray, as well as his website at thomascmurray.com. Thank you for joining me this morning, Thomas.
Hey, Robert, what a pleasure to be here today, and hello from your friends down south in the United States. It's good to be with you today. Thanks for the invite.
My pleasure. Great to connect with you at COSN last week in Chicago, and congratulations on receiving the NSBA's prestigious 20 to watch as an Education Thought Leader of the Year. You've had an interesting career path, and was it a direct path for you?
Just about me by any means. It is always the kids that we serve. It is always a team effort. And any sort of those awards, I always share and dedicate to my family, but also to countless educators that I work shoulder to shoulder with from coast to coast that do incredible things for kids every day. So appreciate the shout, but it's always a team effort. You know, when I think about my own path, it's funny. It wasn't, I feel like it was just yesterday. I was starting out, leaving college, thinking I had a clue as what I was getting myself into in elementary education. Can still remember walking to a fourth grade classroom in Pennsylvania, closing the door for the first time and feeling like, oh shoot, this isn't just student teaching anymore. Like, where's my mentor teacher? This is real now. I got to do this. And I did spend 14 years in a public school. One of the things in working in DC that I really appreciate now is having the understanding of the difficulties, the challenges, the real life issues that educators facing, but also the rewards of working with kids and what it's like to see the smile of a kindergartner or a first grader, that light bulb go off, or even a high school senior learning something for the first time, or getting accepted to that college that they really wanted, or getting the first job offer, those kinds of things. You know, I look at my career and it is not. People ask all the time, like, how did you get to do what you're doing? Like, how are you kind of that front man now for Future Ready Schools? Where did that come from? And it started in a fourth grade classroom, and I spent 4 years in fourth grade and getting to know kids, and you know, I remember the last days of school. Every year I'd have tears in my eyes saying goodbye to those kids and truly loving them like my own. And I learned there that all we do is about relationships. It's about loving, caring about kids. It's about seeing the innocence in their eyes, and our job is to help try and move them forward so they can be truly productive global citizens. I spent some time then. I moved to middle school. People often ask and say, like, why in the world would you go to middle school? You know, I find that people either love that age or they hate that age. I loved that age. It was like, it was hormones on wheels for those kids running around, you know, and had a great time there. Started my first principalship there. I did that for a few years. Ended up moving back to my elementary school where I was for a few years, and was an elementary principal for 3 years there before moving over to district office and starting to get a bit broader lens and understanding differences between buildings, differences in leadership, differences in school culture, some of those things that are foundational to the work that we do today. And then it was Digital Learning Day, actually, where my district was highlighted. We were one of 3 districts in the nation, and that became my initial connection to Washington, D.C., because that's something run by the Alliance for Excellent Education where I was. And so it wasn't a normal path or a normal jump. We happened to have been highlighted something. I happened to stay connected to them. One thing led to the next, and fast forward 3 years now, and there I am helping to run Future Ready Schools.
Well, so it's an interesting career path, and it isn't always direct. And people ask me how I landed my gig, and you know, after spending 10 years at a university in administration, previous life as a sport information director, and then on the business development side of the university and connecting with Kevin O'Leary and launching his learning company, I started this thing called EdTech as a consultant and Mindshare Learning, and 15 years later, you know, we're going strong with a publication and a conference, and it's really about envisioning the future and controlling your destiny. If you're passionate about a mission, and as we are in education technology. And speaking of which, you've been on another mission with a colleague and writing a book, the newest book, Learning Transformed: 8 Keys to Designing Tomorrow's Schools Today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what inspired it?
Sure. So, and thanks for asking that and giving that a shout. So, one of my best friends, Eric Scheninger, a guy that's certainly well known throughout the world in terms of digital leadership, we initially connected through social media. We started seeing each other at conferences. We became good personal friends outside of the education realm. And we've been doing in the past couple of years a variety of work. You see, Eric, his work has been focused on school leadership as well. And my work through Future Ready Schools has very much been focused on school leaders. So we have the opportunity, truly the privilege, to work with thousands of school leaders, each of us around the country, traditionally here in the U.S., but throughout the country. And we're seeing so many of the same issues, but we're also seeing so many great success stories, places that are breaking the chains of poverty, places where their backs are against the wall, where their funding is tight, yet they still are doing amazing things for kids. And so, and having dinner one night, we said, we're doing so much of the same type of work. We're seeing and highlighting these incredible stories where kids are winning, where leaders are doing amazing things for kids. Let's put it into paper. What are the commonalities? What are the themes that we're seeing in how to transform schools? What are the schools doing where they're truly preparing kids for their world moving forward? So we started to do a lot of research in a variety of different areas. We really wanted to boil it down to what is it that actually works. On one hand, there's some pie in the sky out there, and there always has been in education, and there's a time and a place for that 50,000-foot level that, but we needed to make it very attainable and actionable and concrete for people. We didn't just want it to be that 50,000-foot view of what learning could be. We wanted
Sure.
somebody to be able to have takeaways that day, try things, connect with different people, implement things that had
Awesome.
been done, and were also scalable. And so we started to do that. We also did a lot of research in a lot of different areas on what is the most compelling research saying in different areas on transformation that actually works. So our book actually starts with the foundational piece, one of our foundational keys, and that's leadership and school culture that lays the foundation. That comes from the work that both Eric and I see nationwide. When we take a look
Right.
at some of the most dynamic things happening in areas that don't have a whole lot of money or don't have, one-to-one devices or those kinds of things, we look at you have dynamic leaders creating cultures of innovation where teachers are free and encouraged to take risks. They're encouraged to innovate, to empower kids. That really becomes the foundation of the work because we've also both seen places that seem to have it all, places, they're not one to one. They're like, well,
Right.
we're 2 to 1. Everybody's got a Chromebook and an iPad, and you know what? They're teaching in the same way they have been for 20 years. And
Right.
so we wanted to ground it in that foundational pieces. And when we did a lot of research on leadership and a lot of research on culture, the research really it was compelling and but also really what we believed. And that impact on leadership was truly, besides the impact of a teacher in the classroom, number one. So ultimately number two in how to set the tone for a district-wide transformation. We then
Fantastic.
took a look at how do we redesign the learning experience. We have over 190, almost 200 citations related to research and evidence. And one of the things that there was a study that came out from Gallup. And this was also,
Hmm.
we put this in the introduction, and they studied, it was about almost 1 million children nationwide. I shouldn't say they studied, they surveyed almost 1 million children nationwide. And they had urban, they had rural, they had all different states, they across the board. They wanted to make sure it was a good representation of the culture, of the ethnicity, of genders, everything like that. And so when they did that, they took a look at a variety of questions, but one of them really started to look at how engaged people were in their classes, how engaged kids were. And what you see is from fifth grade to 12th grade, it goes down every single year from fifth until 11th when it ticks up just a little bit senior
Right.
year. Which we kind of joke and say that's kind of that, oh shoot, I have to graduate, I better figure this out, or
Right.
like senior prom, I'm the light at the end of the tunnel, almost there. And when we take a look at some of that research, we have to ask ourselves, if 1 million kids are telling us this, what are we going to do about it? And so we wanted to
Absolutely.
ground it in evidence of how do we redesign the learning experience, what actually works. We took a look at things like the rigor relevance framework from ICLE, and that's the organization that Eric works with as well. And when we look at how do we make things more relevant, more personal, there's a little bit of a discourse out there between personalized learning and learning that's personal, and we point that out in the book, and we really kind of err more on the side of what's personal for people in that regard. But
Right.
then we looked at all the other facets of it's not just about the teaching side or the learning side, there's many pieces that impact all of this. And of course, the
Absolutely.
teaching and learning is certainly key to this work, and that's why we start with leadership and culture, then moving to learning. Our third chapter really looks at that return on instruction, something we really tried to coin, not just return on investment, but return on instruction, and taking a look at what is the data that we're using, what's the evidence that we have out there, what are ways that we can collect that, what's some observable or objective behavior. Sometimes you're hearing educators out there that want to ignore all sorts of metrics, and we certainly make the case that we don't want to just look at one standardized test and make it the end all be all, but
Right.
we also can't look at all these different observable behaviors and metrics out there and just say we're going to ignore all of them. We see some of that train of thought out there as well. And so, how do we ground it, or how do we ground our thoughts in evidence, but also ensure a return on instruction truly, so that we're using taxpayer money well? We want to make sure that we're doing that, but we're also transforming that experience for kids. So, some of the other areas we looked at, for instance, in Chapter 4, it's taking a look, and our key in Chapter 4 is that learning spaces really must become learner centered.
Absolutely.
One of the pieces that I write about is a personal experience, when it was my own reflection, where I was thinking about the classroom that I designed for myself when I was a fourth grade teacher, and designing it for me, not for my kids. And something that I coined the cemetery effect that we write here, where
Right.
I happened to be, it's a couple years ago now, driving by a cemetery out near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and I pull up to this cemetery and I look over this entire place. Excuse me, and I realized that the tombstones were equidistant, they were all facing one direction, and as I looked over that cemetery, it hit me that if I drew that on a map, and I drew my very first classroom, pencil and paper on a map, they
Right.
truly would have been identical. And so the more research that we did, and I have to tell you, looking through this book, this was not a book that Eric and I wrote feeling like we know everything from the start and we're just going to write it all down. We learned probably as much as we put down of things that we knew in the
Right.
research and talking to school leaders. And one of them was on learning spaces, and that learning spaces have to become learner centered. We cannot have this environment where kids are always an island unto themselves, and then at the same out of the other corner of our mouth be saying that we're problem solving, collaboration, all these 21st century skills that people refer to,
Sure.
because they have to line up. We then looked at the piece on how do we actually get there, and that's the professional learning side. And we use the term professional learning and not professional development purposefully,
Sure.
because learning's the heart of what we do. No educator gets up in the morning saying, "I can't wait to be developed." But again, we look at the actual research on what actually works. And Robert, what's fascinating here is the top down, one size fits all, sit and get, hours based approach professional learning that is prevalent across the entire United States, and honestly, in most of the world, I would say, is that doesn't show much of an impact. So what actually does?
Right.
And so we look at 3 or 4 major studies that have been done in the past 4 or 5 years on professional learning, and what's not showing much impact, but what we're spending billions of dollars a year on, but at the same time, what actually does work. So it's not a book that points out everything that's wrong and everything that everybody's doing wrong. It's a book that shares the evidence. Sometimes, yeah, we need to fix some of those things, but then it moves from that to practice, and how can it be transformed. So we really take a look in that chapter at taking a look at professional learning. Just a couple other pieces. In Chapter
Sure.
6, we really dive into leveraging technology, taking a look at ed tech, what actually works versus what's ultimately a waste of money. We are spending billions of dollars a year in the United States and throughout the world in educational technologies, and some of it's proven to absolutely be worth every penny, and some of it's been proven to be not worth anything. And so we want to make sure,
Right.
what are those practices, and highlighting those teaching practices. The second to last piece is taking a look at community, and how are we collaborating and engaging with the community. So much of the efforts with community are one directional. We share newsletters, we share things out, and it's kind of just sharing information. If we're going to transform our schools and ultimately transform learning, we have to move past that to moving to more of a collaborative approach, where our key there truly was that our community collaboration and engagement must be woven into the fabric of a school's culture. They have to be truly part of it. And I think sometimes in education we goof this up. We are here to serve the community, not vice versa. And so we want to make sure that the community is truly an integral part of that. And then we wrap up our book on leading the charge, and how do we do this? How do we swim against the tide? What do we need to do to move forward? And ultimately, at the end of the day, our kids need and deserve, if they're going to be successful in their world and their future, when we look at and are opening things like automation and robotics that are drastically changing the world of work, if they're going to be productive citizens in that society moving forward. My daughter's she's a first grader. She's the class of 2028.
Wow,
She
that's
won't even
exciting.
hit the workforce until, say, 2035, 2034, somewhere in that realm. What's the world of work going to look like for her? and for her, and Eric has little ones as well, and for them moving forward, what's that world of work look like? But as schools, how are we preparing them for that life? So it's been an incredible journey with Eric. It's taken us probably about a year and a half because of all the research that we've done, working coast to coast with school leaders. And at the end of every chapter, we actually highlight from the own words of school leaders vignettes. We call them IPAs, Innovative Practices in Action, not the beer IPA, the Innovative Practice in Action, the actual practice in the classroom, where we hear from superintendents of the year and principal of the year and their transformation and how they actually did it and where they're going for kids. And those are incredibly moving and certainly motivational for leaders that read them.
Well, kudos for you for your leadership along with Eric and your passion in transforming learning and innovation in the 21st century. You know, we see a lot of pockets of innovation across the Canadian landscape, and I presume you see the same in the U.S. What are some of the barriers that you highlight in the book in overcoming?
Yeah, so a great question there, and I couldn't agree with you more. That's something I certainly say all the time, and that people will ask, do we see innovation in education? Or, I gave the example of the cemetery effect, and we absolutely do see lots of innovation, but it's in pockets. It's how do we scale that ultimately?
Right.
So some of the barriers, and I think we could certainly talk about this for a variety of different. We probably talk about this all
That
day.
could be another episode.
Yeah, how about it? But I'm going to actually start first with the internal one, and that's our own mindset. Sometimes it's our
Right.
own mindset, it's our own lens that gets in the way. One of the things that when I became an administrator after moving from being a teacher, it was so eye opening to me how drastically different teachers talk. And now I almost laugh when I say it. But when I go back to teaching in my first few years, my first 6 or 7 years of teaching, I guess I assumed that everybody just taught like me, and the way I did it was just the way to do it. And
Right.
I had taught really in so many ways like I was taught. And when you take a look at that, when I became an administrator and certainly saw, two seventh grade social studies teachers that were both really good, but dramatically different, it was incredibly eye opening of what's working between them, but might be different in the way kids are responding to it. And so, it really brings out in so many different ways the strengths that are out there. When you look at some of the other roadblocks besides our own mindset, because I would actually put that first.
Yeah.
We do have some real issues with things like funding. In the United States, and I'm sure, and this is probably a case around the world. I've never met a school leader anywhere in the world that says, they have more money than they know what to do with. They're not sure how to spend it. It's never the case.
That's never been
Finances are a real issue, and just hearing from districts when states are cutting funding, or local school boards are voting certain ways, or they're looking to reduce funding. It becomes a challenge. Part of the comparison that we make is when you look at the world of work changing with autonomy, and when you look at the robots and automation and those types of things, see, computers and technology typically get better and cheaper and faster over time, but people don't. And so when we're in a profession that are all people oriented, it's expensive to provide these high quality educations, kind of, especially in that traditional mindset. And so one of those barriers is finance, and we don't shy away from that. We have a big section on sustainability, and that really comes towards the end of how do we make sure this is sustainable from a financial end, from a political end, as well as from a pedagogical end. One of the challenges that we're seeing from a pedagogical end is, you do have an influx of people go out on leave, people retire, those types of things. How do you keep the continuity going where you have people changing in a realm where you often your principals or your superintendents are leaving or changing every 3 years? And so part of that issue is also from a sustainability end, the turnover in leadership. It's hard to build things before you're all of a sudden going in another direction. So we could certainly go on and on about
Sure.
challenges. But what we love, and part of the reason that we highlighted it, and at the end of every chapter, our final words of every chapter truly are, you are part of the solution, and helping to make sure that we can create this better for kids. It's a solution-oriented book, not a problem-based book.
Fascinating, and sure to be an award-winning book in the not-too-distant future. When will it be released?
Sure. So ASCD is who we're publishing with, and so they are publishing. We're shooting for the end of May, but certainly by June 1st. So absolutely, it'll be available in that range. It is available for pre-sale at this point. But people that want to encourage it, that are listening to the podcast, if you go to tinyurl.com.
Right.
/learning transformed. Learning and transformed are both capitalized. I believe it may be case sensitive, but tinyurl.com /learning transformed will actually give some of the endorsements that we've had from people around the world, truly, that have endorsed the book and believe in the work that we're doing, but also some of the images that we're sharing and some things like that.
Fantastic.
So it really points to some of that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning, Thomas.
Hey, glad to be here, Robert, and hello from the United States again. It's always good to connect with you, my friend.
That was Thomas Murray, Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools. My name is Robert Margolacci, the Mindshare Learning Report. And until next time, keep the learning curve steep. That's a wrap.
All right.
Thank you so much.
No, thanks for the platform to share a little bit of that. I really appreciate that.
Well, that was fun.